I can go ahead and kick things off. So we have two dives into reducing administrative burden and improving performance for state data collection. Nona and Eva and Kenneth are going to go through the case study on New Mexico, and we'll go through a round of introductions, and then John and I and Sierra are going to go through our case study on improving performance for state data collection. So we have a pretty small group here today. So we have this group of presenters here, and we were hoping that we could go through a round of introductions, including everyone who's participating here as a participant. I can go first. I'm Elissa Cito, and I head up the marketing and sales group here at eScholar. Really excited to share some of the things that we've done on the technical side that improve performance and then therefore reduce some of the burden that's on folks who have to do state data collection. John, you want to go next?
Sure. Maybe we just go right to left today. It's just
yeah,
that's fine. Hi, I'm John Pizzuto. I am Senior Vice President for eScholar. So I've been leading the development teams for eScholar for about 16 years. And just through being part of the team, now I'm responsible for just leading both sides, the business side and the technology side. But excited to be on this call and hear the feedback and see what the folks have done. I got a preview ready to what Ken and Nona and Eva talked about. It's really nice. So I'm going to sit and observe, and if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Go ahead, Ken.
Hi, and it's morning for me still, so good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name's Ken Stowe. I'm the Interim Division Director of Curriculum and Instruction here at New Mexico Public Ed Department. It's great to see some Texas folks. I taught at Edgewood ISD in the west side of San Antonio for some time. So anywho, it's great to be on the line here and great to see everyone.
Hi, I'm Eva Corcoran. I worked with Nona on the project in New Mexico, looking at and reducing administrative burden. And I do a lot of my work in data and policy analysis in the education space. Happy to be here. Excited to share our story with you.
Hey, I'm Nona Ullman. I know most of you on this call, and I've actually worked with all the states of Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana. Arantha, before your time, I worked on the Goals 2000. That gives you a sense of how long I've been doing this for on state policy for Louisiana when I was at KPMG. But I just want you guys to meet one another. You guys have all been doing great work. Both the New York BOCES folks, the Texas, the Austin, and I'm sure in Louisiana. And I just wanted you to meet one another. We've been working together over the Texas and New Mexico over this past summer, and there's been incredible work done in Texas with helping manage $100 million of ESSER funding with Teresa and Monette, and then with Amanda putting together the RFAs for grant proposals for districts, and then in New Mexico for the governor helping to reduce administrative burden for teachers and administrators throughout the state. And as I just saw these common threads of trying to be more service oriented towards school districts and state education agencies and really make a difference as teachers are feeling increasingly stressed in their jobs. How can we reduce burden that's coming in from the state and really help districts? So we want to let you guys do most of the talking and meet one another because we think there's a lot of opportunity for sharing best practices. So just briefly, go ahead. We're going to do the rest of it. Should we have everyone else introduce themselves on the call just briefly?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay, so how do you want to go? Should we do Texas first? Do you want to do Teresa first and then Amanda?
Absolutely, happy to kick us off. So hi everyone, I'm Teresa Spiewak. I'm the Division Director of District Planning Performance Management. And so really excited, we worked with Improve, where we have two programs, Resilient School Support Program, Data Fellows Program, where we support 180 districts across the state with strategic planning, performance management, with COVID recovery, learning acceleration. And we're taking all of that to now support all districts across the state with what we're building out as the effective district framework. So really excited to learn from you all today. And with that, I will pass it off to Amanda.
Well, howdy everyone from Texas. So excited to be here. So I am a Director of Special Projects on the Integrated District Supports team on the larger team with Teresa. And so I have been working on our most recent interim grant cycle called LASSO, Learning Acceleration Support Opportunities. And we are working towards a future vision of one system where all of our grants and also strategic planning submissions for districts across the state can be done in a one-stop shop on an e-digital platform that's all integrated and connected and streamlined and coherent and all those wonderful things. And so got to work with Nona on some of our grant work with LASSO. And so we've talked about how eager I am to connect with others who are thinking in these ways, thinking in a service orientation towards district and streamlining, reducing burden. So super excited to be here, and I will pass it over to my colleague Manette.
Thanks, Amanda. My name is Manette Coleman. I'm one of the district support specialists on the Resilient School Support Program team. And so I've been working with districts basically in Central Texas and helping them as they are supporting them as they engage with technical assistance providers who are helping them implement learning acceleration strategies along through a continuous improvement process to build their capacity to do so ongoingly. So happy to be here.
Perfect. Do you want to do Louisiana next, then New York, or how do you?
Sure, that sounds good. And then anyone else?
This is Ananta Lakakula. I'm the Research and Analytics Manager at Louisiana. I lead all eScholar applications here at Louisiana Department of Education. I'm excited to be here with the new development that is going on with eScholar. I always wanted to be part and contribute myself there. Nice to see you all.
Thank
And
you,
then
Nessa.
Julianne and Barbara.
Hey, Barbara. Hey.
Hey, Julianne.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for inviting. So I'm Julianne Ross-Kleiman. I'm an instructional data analysis and tech specialist at Ulster BOCES. First time here in the group. Met Nona at Learning Forward conference. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking of sending you some information about the DayTag conference that's coming up. And here's my dog. That's about it. I'm just going to sit and listen.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara. I'm an administrator through Ulster BOCES. I work in the area of school development through our instructional services department. What I do is I work with 8 of our county schools in Ulster County. I've done work with the state, New York State Education Department as well prior, doing work on special education, technical assistance, for school improvement and helping our students who are in those areas of subgroups need help and supports for making improvements in districts that have been on lists. And I also sit on a state group that's involved with teacher prep. It's connected with the Cedar group out of the University of Florida. So that's me in a nutshell.
And then I invited Jake Friedman. We like to have students involved in any of the work that we're doing because we're all here really on behalf of students. And we're looking at having Jake join us as an intern. He's at Cornell. So Jake, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, so I'm Jake Friedman. I'm a freshman at Cornell in the ILR School, Industrial and Labor Relations. And well, thank you guys for allowing me on here to listen. And I'm just here to listen, be a sort of sponge and learn about Improve's work and all of your work.
Awesome.
And then
Okay.
last but not least, I forgot to mention Sierra. I apologize because you weren't on the.
Sierra, we had her turn her camera on and everything.
Yes. Sierra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi guys. I am Sierra. I am the marketing coordinator here at eScholar. So it's great to see everyone, meet everyone, and hear your bios. And I'm excited to get through the webinar.
Terrific. I'm going to share my screen. So I think we had sent, at least the folks in Texas haven't had a chance to see the final report. We are really proud of this. So basically, let me put this on slideshow mode. So we did this past summer, and basically it all started in May of 2022 when Governor Grisham issued an executive order. And this is what it looked like, but it mandated that the Public Education Department reduce administrative burden for the 22-23 academic year by at least 25%. And so we were hired, I think, in June, and then we ended up working over the course of 8 weeks to inventory all of the actual reporting requirements and application requirements, and then come up with 25% reduction. So it was really fast and furious, and we are going to share with you what happened. Just to cut to the chase at the end, it went very well. And in education, good press isn't always what happens, but in this case, we actually got really, really good press from the local news, and we ended up cutting more than 25%. We cut 34% overall, and of the 34%, 41% was for teachers. So We're hoping that your states can have share some of the success. We're going to tell you how we did it and give you all the answers. And Kenneth is one of the stars, so we're really excited to have him talk about it. Just to summarize, basically, administrative burden is a problem. Teachers have been feeling burnout. Administrators have been feeling burnout, especially with COVID, and there's good reason for it. It takes an average. When we did inventoried all of the reports, that there was approximately 5 full-time equivalent hours, 5 full-time equivalent people worth of hours to comply with administrative requirements. That's 10,500 total hours per LEA. Most of that is mandated by federal and state statute. And as I know, at least in the work we've done with Texas and New Mexico, a lot of our time is spent poring over those statutes and making sure that we comply with them and we understand what are the data requirements. And a lot of it is, mandated, although there is some flexibility and really, a greater need for state departments to interpret what that is, because it's not always clear in the statute. This amount of time is very burdensome for the charters and smaller SLEAs who have the same reporting requirements as the bigger districts. And in New Mexico, most of the funding is state and federally driven. There's not as much local funding. So there's also an additional fiscal accountability role that New Mexico has that Texas, I don't believe, has, or New York. And as I mentioned, some of the statutes, we did a whole analysis of every state statute and we applied a rubric to it in New Mexico. So we're happy to share that methodology with you as well. And it just shows that there's a huge amount of requirements and oftentimes it's hard to keep track of those. And then there's a lot of overlapping requirements in those that make it particularly difficult for districts. So the solution is let's cut the burden. What can the State Department of Ed do for its share of the burden? The district also has burdensome requirements on the schools and teachers and administrators, but what can the state do? And so what we did is we found 34% or 10 hours per teacher per year in savings. That's over a day and a half worth of time, or a day, 1.2 days. And then we think we could actually have increased it to 38% if New Mexico went to potentially a statewide student information system and or special education system. That's probably not going to be viable for New York or Texas, but maybe Louisiana, which with the smaller amount of students. The way that we describe administrative burden is that it's required by law for fiscal or program review or compliance, but that it's not currently maximally streamlined, reduced, or automated. So we know that there's still a fiscal accountability requirement and programmatic review by state departments of ed, but let's make it as streamlined as possible. And second of all, the key question was, is it not useful to schools or administrators or teachers or helpful to students? So if it wasn't useful, we wanted to get rid of it. We didn't consider something to be a burden if the local education agency had to do it already in its normal course of operations, like requiring budgeting or some kinds of financial reporting or strategic planning. That has to happen anyways. We just didn't want to make it harder at the state level. So overall, as I mentioned, the goal was reduce reporting by 25%. And then there was also a piece in here where we wanted to reduce district time for reimbursement of grant funded items by 25%. And what that means is that, and I'd be curious from, Amanda, your perspective too, as administering these grants, in New Mexico, there was a long time and a lot of errors that would happen when the districts tried to get reimbursed for those grant funds for the expenditures. And so we actually did like a whole business process flow analysis to see how can we reduce the amount of time it takes districts to get paid back for expenditures they already made on behalf of these grants. New Mexico has 318,000 students. So it's probably more on the scale of Louisiana, much smaller, obviously, than Texas or New York. And it's 89 districts, 57 charter schools, and there were 24 bureaus within the Department of Ed. We met with, I think, every single one of them to do the inventory of the reports. And we came up with a master list of reports that we will share with you to understand all the requirements and where there was overlap. And basically what we did is reviewed, there were a number of prior studies that had been done. We also looked at other state studies, like Colorado has looked at reducing administrative burden. We reviewed every state statute that had to deal with administrative burden or data collection. The New Mexico PD has a great website. And so we looked at all of the information required on there, all the reports. We interviewed a lot of the external stakeholder groups. And this was another area where I think the Secretary of Education and the governor reaped a lot of political wins, really, because reaching out to the two unions, we met with the head of both unions in New Mexico. We met with the head of the State Superintendents Association. We met with the head of the charter school. And just by virtue of saying, how can we reduce administrative burden for you, asking them that question, asking them, what's the most burdensome part of what the state collects from you? just let us know. It generated a lot of goodwill. And then we had a lot of good quotes for the press articles later, because we'd reach out to these folks and we knew who to talk to later to get the good press. And they really were happy. And it did change the whole kind of view of state ed in many respects, from one that was more compliance driven to one that was focusing on being more customer driven. So I'm going to basically tell you what the deliverables were. I'm going to turn over to Ken, because he was the one, when I mentioned the 10 hours, he found 9.5 of those, and he's going to tell you how he did it and kind of what happened since we've finished the initial planning work. So as mentioned, we did a reports inventory, and basically I can just show you briefly what that looks like. This is what it is. And basically Eva and I went through and you can see here, but you can sort it by every single, and this is available to you as well if you're interested, by every division. And we came up with the report name, who was actually responsible for generating it, what was the directorate, when is it due? So you could sort by due dates. Is it due annually? Was it a federal, state, or statute type of requirement, or other? Was it program evaluation? The purpose? How was it collected? So STARS is kind of the eScholar way of collecting data in New Mexico. What kind of burden was it? So we looked at whether it was an application burden, so something they had to apply for a grant. Was it data? Was it a program evaluation? Was it just a report? And then we actually said, should you keep it, reduce the frequency of collecting it, maybe just reduce the number of fields, eliminate it, streamline the process, or maybe we keep it, or maybe we have to add a new one. And then we actually estimated the total amount of time it took at the Department of Ed level and at the LEA level, and then what the proposed reduction was. And then we actually said, here are the assumptions, like how can you do this? And we also referred to like the state and statute. So this is available to you, but I just wanted to show you kind of, we really did it from the bottom up in a very detailed way. And then we came up with overall recommendations, which I'll go over with you right now, an implementation plan, which I think Ken may talk to you about later, which is who was responsible for doing what within the Department of Ed, which was part of our requirements. We came up with a rubric, and the rubric is really cool too. The rubric is basically, if you're going to collect before the State Department of Ed asks for any new data, how can you decide whether or not we should ask for it? Is it compliance, like state or federally required? Is it useful to LEAs? Is it useful to the SEA? There was a lawsuit in New Mexico to ensure equitable outcomes. So there was additional data required for that, or is it a financial custodialship? And then once you know why you're doing it, is it feasible? And do we know who owns it? Do we know what actions are going to be taken? Are the benefits of collecting the data greater than the costs? Can we get the data on a timely enough basis to actually make it worth collecting? Or are we just looking at trends? And then are the data high quality? So we came up with this whole rubric. And so overall, the way that we found them, and then I'm going to turn over to Ken, is one, we did find some orphan data that was being required by legislation that we didn't have anyone that was actually managing that data or looking for the data or using the data. We found a lot of duplication of unnecessary data requests. We also used that data necessity rubric, and we reviewed every element in STARS and realized that we didn't need to collect all the data all the time for each one of these. There were 4 data collection cycles a year, and that was super helpful. We also realized that there were a lot of different systems that had come up in each different individual public education department area, because there was not always one coordinated source of data. And so different systems came up to ask for their own data. Let me just go on to the other ones. And then we came up with a way to streamline the processes, especially the request for reimbursement. We found that basically by providing better training up front, you could reduce the error rates. And then that would not mean that requests would come back to you for rework, and you could save time that way. And then just to sustain the improvements, and Ken will talk to you about this next, that they came up with a data governance council to continue to really inventory, review, and manage this process. So there was some systemic governance and accountability processes. So at the end of the day, we just looked at all the bureaus, and we came up with a number of reports by bureau, the total time it was taking for local education agencies, and what the reduction would be. And then you could see here the actual number of hours, and then the total percent within the bureau. So curriculum instruction contributed to 63% of the total reduction within the bureau, and for 64% for LEAs. when we talked to the teachers about it, we had also did some surveys, or New Mexico PD did some surveys, and we asked them, what is one burden, if reduced, would give you more time to focus on teaching and learning? You can see here that paperwork, non-relevant PD, testing, lack of prep time, these were some of the top. And then if you go into, this is teeing it up now for Kenneth, one of the biggest issues here, you can see this teacher said, I have 20 years in elementary ed. Why does it take 16 pages of forms containing redundant information? And this is for the Tier 1, Tier 2, the multi-tiered system of student support. It required a lot of work. And so this is where I'm going to turn over to Ken now to talk about how he found the 9.5 hours.
Thank you, Nona. And I think it's important for me to just situate this conversation in saying that the work that Nona and her team did at Improve really is just the start of where we're trying to go throughout the state. And it's really the work that her team helped us do really helped us create like marching orders throughout the agency on what this reduction can actually look like. So I was kind of lucky. Nona and her team scheduled a meeting with me. They're like, hey, Ken, we just went out there. We interviewed all of these teachers. They're talking about the student assistance team process. They're saying that a third of their students are having to fill out a bunch of paperwork on a third of their students. Like, what's going on with this? And I was in a lucky position because we had already gotten the process started on interviewing teachers, working with a small community of practice around the student assistance team process, and how we can reduce the number of forms that they have to do, how can we reduce the redundant asks between those forms, and how can we be more clear on the criteria through which a student must be referred to the student assistance team. So real quick, just what is the student assistance team? What they do is they take referrals from teachers and other educational professionals. They collect data. They make determinations on referrals to the multidisciplinary determination team, the MDT, disciplinary team. They make referrals for functional behavioral assessments, 504, right? So they're really, what I try to say is the SAT team is that first line of defense against the over referral of students to special education and 504, right? Because we want to create equity. We want to keep kids in the classroom instead of receiving pull-out services, things like that. So what we did is we got a community of practice of teachers together. We first just looked at, okay, your caseload, it's crazy. I was on a school site visit, a small to medium-sized elementary school, and they had a SAT caseload in the 80s. How can you really be individualized for each of those students when you're just trying to push paper, right? Because that's really what it became. So we first looked at the criteria to which a student is assigned to the SAT, and we went straight to the law. And we were saying, if a student's been restrained 2 or more times, if a student is in danger of being retained in their grade, if a student is being referred to special education or recently exited IEP services, we want that kind of support team, that buffer there to make sure that we don't experience any recidivism. And then teacher referrals, right? So we're very clear on if a student doesn't meet one of these 5-6 criteria, why are they on the SAT, right? Because the SAT's not where you provide interventions. They're just the team to help you think through the data and help you collect that data. Then we looked at the forms themselves. We lettered them. The first time we lettered them, it went from like A to M or O, I think, somewhere around there. We said, that's just crazy. So for each of those students that a teacher says, I have a third of my students, they were having to complete a ton of forms. So we looked at all of those forms and we were able to reduce the redundant asks and data from all those forms and reduce it from A to like O to A to H, right? So really, we're very purposeful, reducing the number of forms. Then we looked at the forms themselves. A lot of the forms were just big text boxes, right? And as educators, what do we want to do when we're given a blank box? We want to fill that thing up, right? And we're going to spend hours filling it up, giving every single little detail that we possibly can, which is great in some instances, not necessary in others. So we then looked at, hey, can this be a checkbox? Can this be, say, a bulleted list that they select from instead of just some blank open-ended text box where they're going to spend a lot of time filling that out? So I would say that the reduction of 9 hours per teacher throughout a year is quite conservative. When you start to think of teachers saying that 1/3 of their students were on SAT, and we just, one, reduce the number of students that should be on SAT, and then two, really reduce the amount of paperwork. Now, lessons learned and why this is a continuing effort. Like that work, this work is nowhere near done, right? So we do that, we publish it, we give ourselves a pat on the back, and we're hearing from teachers, what, I thought you did that whole reduction thingy. Like, I mean, I'm still sitting here doing a bunch of forms, and really it's on the districts, right? So here in New Mexico, we don't have a statewide student information system. And what we started to notice is districts were still requiring plans for all of their, we call it multi-layered system of supports. In other states, it's multi-tiered system of supports. So our largest district, Albuquerque Public Schools, was requiring all their teachers to do tier 2 and tier 3 plans. So for all of their tier 2 and tier 3 students, they're still sitting there having to do plans for each of their students. And of course, that's not working, right? A teacher is not going to feel that reduction in burden. So just to say that we did a lot of work. The work was teacher driven. We talked to diags, we talked to teachers, we talked to principals, but it's really in a local control state, which I know Texas is, and I know many other states are. It really takes that careful technical assistance conversation with each of our districts, and that's ongoing work to actually reduce the burden on the teacher level. Nona, oh, another thing that I think Nona wanted me to talk about is the Data Governance Council. So all of the work that came out of the work that we did with Improve, we assigned a host of directors throughout the agency. We have about 15 people on the Data Governance Council that we've required all new data asks to run through the Data Governance Council. We use that rubric that Nona pulled up to say, okay, is this legislatively required? That's the first thing we ask, because if it's not legislatively required, what are we doing with it? Why are we asking for it? I know each of our programs, we live in silos. It's nice to have some data like, oh, we ask for that because it helps guide our program, or it helps do this. That's great, but let's try to find another way that we can gather that context without it having to be part of this formal reporting structure. So, anywho, I've been sitting here running my mouth a whole lot, and we've done a lot of work. Improve really helped us in consolidating our thoughts around what this vision could be here in New Mexico, and it's still ongoing. So, and I'd love to talk more if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, set up a meeting and talk more about this work, I'd love to, but I'm going to hand it back over to the Improve team.
Well, there were a couple commonalities that I thought would be interesting. So I know from Amanda's point of view, in the grant applications, we were also trying to reduce the number of free text fields to more bulleted lists to make it easier, but then the program people were struggling with, well, we're not getting enough data, to make a determination. I know with Teresa, they're funding data fellows all over the state of Texas to help provide some of this information. So, and they're working directly through technical assistance providers with districts. So I just thought they would have a lot of really interesting, feedback on this as well. And I know that Julianne, you're leading a lot of data efforts as well for your BOCES area. So, and I'm just curious, and Barbara's also working with a number of districts. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are based on what you're hearing.
I mean, I'm sorry, Julianne.
Okay, no, go ahead.
So a lot of the work that I'm also doing, Ken, you spoke to that, is, in New York, we have the multi-tiered systems of support. And New York actually is one of the later states in adapting. They've had a draft in place for 2-3 years now, I think. And it was really through the Office of Special Education. And so, there's still so much nebulous, thinking around how we identify struggling learners. So, some districts are still calling them IST teams, instructional study teams. Other districts are still calling them child study teams. other districts are still not really clear on the difference between RTI and PBIS and what is MTSS. And so that's been a large part of my work, is working with the directors, the assistant superintendents, and really helping them to identify what is their whole system look like and how do we gather that data. I'm actually working with one of our districts across the river right now and helping them look at their MTSS for SEL. And so what we're doing is creating some templates and rubrics to help their team begin, and it's going to be teacher driven as well, because that's where the work needs to be, and helping them that way. So yeah, this is exciting. I love talking this, with people who are doing this work, because it's really takes a lot of work and thought. So thank you.
Dr. Ulster, if I pronounce that right, you and I need to meet.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, and because I started, MLSS was super fresh. It was a draft manual that was plopped on my desk back in 2019. They're like, figure it out. And just to kind of like give you a quick where I see it, it's teacher teams, it's the PLCs, right?
Absolutely.
Getting it out of these separate teams that make these decisions, but not these decisions, and bringing it back to the teachers and really bolstering up the PLC process is where I've been able to move a lot of the work around MLSS here in New Mexico.
That's exciting. Yes, so we will definitely have to exchange. That sounds wonderful.
And it shows that Barbara's with the Ulster County BOCES, but it's Dr. Hasty.
Oh,
Yes,
Dr.
that's
Hasty.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, that's okay. I didn't want to correct
Oh,
them.
yeah, I see. It's the way it's
Dr. Hasty, thank you.
the
Sorry,
way your
I
name
just-
is written. I was thinking that too.
Does it say Dr. Ulster? No, it says Tischler Hasty. That's okay.
Anything that's ease of use that, yes, so that administrators can look at, that teachers can look at, that understandable is really important. And so actually what I was doing while I was listening as well was I did send Nona you some information about DATAG, and that the importance of when there's meetings where educators get together and they want to have this conversation, because we're the ones who are working with the data in our different management systems, and then reporting what we need to report to the state and how can we find it. I think sharing this information with others is really important. So I sent an RFP that you might want to take a look at in regards to presenting, if not for the upcoming one, but for summer, because we all get together and we need support and we need help and we need to hear what's actually working and happening on the ground. So it's important to hear from one another.
Yeah, Nona and I are working on a presentation now, so maybe we'll look at that together.
It's all good. We Elisa, you had said that we used to present at NCES, right? The IES.
Yeah, the Stats DC data conference in the summer in DC.
That was a good one. I first met eScholar. I met Sean Bay back, like, I think it was in the 90s. It's a long time ago. And then when we had this opportunity in New Mexico, I said, are you guys working there? And they're the ones who referred me to Eva, who's on the call, and Karen. And that's kind of how we reconnected again. And then I was saying, thank you for referring me to Eva to help with the New Mexico work. And Elisa's like, well, how'd it go? And I said, well, you should see, it was really successful. And then she's like, well, you should share this with others. And we've been meaning to. I've been speaking to Texas about it, but we just hadn't had a chance to kind of pull it together. And then eScholar just arranged for the webinar. So it was really, really helpful. But Amanda, Teresa, Monette, you guys have done amazing work in Texas. I have to think there's so much good work that's happening there that you might want to share some of what you guys have learned.
Yeah, I'm definitely making so many connections. I think what's really helpful for me is thinking about some of the work we're aiming for through this lens of reducing that burden, and how we're like looking at those metrics and how we're actually thinking about like how much time is the current process, whatever it is, taking different individuals, whether that's our internal teams, the LEAs, of course, and then what are we sort of aiming for in how we do this. And like you all are saying, that lens of the user is so important. And I know something that's been coming up is we're thinking about how do we consolidate these plans, but I think up until now, like all of the reporting requirements hasn't been included really in that conversation. And I think it's going to come up more when we talk with our users. So just thinking about how to think of the vision of the project and kind of like bring in this lens a lot more. And also it's great to meet all of you. And I've been, as Nona knows, on the hunt to find more like counterparts who are doing similar work. If any of you or you know anyone who is trying to consolidate federal needs assessments and plans, we know in Louisiana they streamline grant applications, but as far as we know, it's kind of pioneering work to bring lots of things together, but can still learn from places that we know have combined a couple plans or different things. So definitely let me know or reach out to me if you're doing that kind of work. But it's just great to hear how everyone's thinking about this and the great success in New Mexico. So
yeah, this is so helpful. And I know a little bit of behind the scenes is like a piece Amanda works on, a piece I work on, a piece we have like IT working on. And so it's also great to hear, I think, when I think of a district experience, and particularly if you've adopted this initiative and you're also like, you need to turn in data to even get, the grant and do the initiative, and then you have the reporting requirements. And I think the other thing that's top of mind for us is, there's times where there's just, have you completed it? Have you used your money? But where can we get more specific on impact measures that will also help a district, a campus, a teacher understand that it's not just like data that you're submitting to say that like, yep, I used the grant, but also how can you use like the impact measures yourselves as a district superintendent to decide I'm ready to scale and sustain this because I've seen it work here. Or, if you did have to do pivots or figure out different priorities. And so I think that's another angle we've really been working at, is in addition to streamlining the process and reducing the burden, how do we also make sure some of that data can be helpful in their like decision-making processes and continuous improvement cycles that they may do. And then we're working on the effective district framework as like a centering framework of like systems level thinking. And so it's been so great to hear Dr. Hasty, and then Kenneth, you talk about MTSS, because that's one of the things, like we're doing alignment on key concepts of like, how are we defining MTSS and what systems do you need to make it successful, and where does that go on the framework, and then how do we center supports around it, and if a district's planning with this lens, or we're requiring data, we're doing grants around it, and so again, just really appreciative to hear the work that you all are doing, and excited to potentially continue to share and be thought partners as people are doing this similar work across the different states.
Awesome. Wanda, I don't know if you wanted to say anything or if she's still there. She just jumped off.
Nope, I'm still here, just hiding behind a blank screen. I don't think I have really anything to add, Nona. Just the only thing I would elevate is just the appreciation for the idea of looking at this and making the effort, because I know, as someone who interacts with districts and teachers and school leaders and all at that level, it's no surprise to you, but this will come as a huge benefit for them and a level of appreciation for people who are on the ground.
Yeah, I will say that everyone we spoke to was so appreciative of the State Department of Ed. And that relationship can oftentimes be adversarial, having worked both at the state and district level, because you guys are tasked with administering these state statutes. And a lot of it is compliance oriented, but ideally you would also, with RSSP, which is the technical support assistance, it's really sharing best practices and, providing the funding to help districts be their best selves, really. And so ideally it's more of that and less of the compliance, but you have the dual role, right? So but any way that you can shout out that you're aware that 89% of what you're asking for is required in state and federal statute, but you're going to make it as easy as possible and reduce, as Julianne had said, the time spent in submitting requirements, to that would be great. And I think even just putting, like you had mentioned, Amanda, put that number in. We didn't do that in the RFAs. I realized we had said, we think the reporting will take you, it's estimated 40 hours or whatever, like they do in your tax returns, even just being aware of what the burden is, for the grant. But I think we should probably have also quantified, like we're saving you at least 15 hours per grant application by not having to fill out all the text that you guys used to do. And there is that fine balance, because I know the program folks were a little bit concerned that they weren't gonna have enough data to make sure people are using the money wisely. So again, it's that balance between being a custodian versus, being as supportive as you can. In case though, so I want to give eScholar a chance at the end and see if there are any more questions. I don't know if Ken, I know we're going to talk potentially about what happened since the report too. So we have a number of issues. And then we did want to see if you guys wanted to continue meeting and sharing best practices. So we were going to offer like a community of practice, and we have a form that we were going to have you, if you're interested, fill out to see if you want to continue meeting or maybe inviting others. So we only have about 15 minutes left. Let me just go back. I did want to just, Amanda, you had said about the needs assessments, where we found that in New Mexico was you can consolidate the needs assessment for Title IV, Part F, and the Indian Education Needs Assessment. I think I mentioned that to you briefly, but IES estimated it was 150 hours per LEA to do the Indian Education Needs Assessment, and Title IV was basically doing something very similar. We actually went and looked at the requirements, and so there was definitely consolidation there. And another area we found was in the career and technical education, and there was a person, Ken, who was it from New Mexico who went through and came up with that best practices checklist? It was like really, really good, but we can also share that with you, or there was a way to reduce that, so that we have very specific things that can help you if you have questions. And then if we could also run things through a community of practice. So I did want to just put this into the chat, and we can share this this presentation with you as well. Let me just put this in the chat. So what we were thinking of for a community of practice is potentially this, where we would talk about over the next like 10 weeks, like maybe we were thinking Wednesdays at 2 p.m. we could just meet and talk about burden reduction, the surveys, the inventory process, a deep dive on the savings. And we could also give you if you wanted to go through this with your state Department of Ed, we could give you kind of the process, the interview guides, if you wanted to do that, or we could provide supplementary help as well. But this was something, if you wanted to do it on your own, we would just share all of our tools with you. And we could also go into the data necessity rubric the next time as well. And if you've gathered any data on certain reports or you're done any work, we could all talk about any of that. We could show you how we in New Mexico streamlined the grants reimbursement process through business process reengineering. Just step by step what we did, where there was duplicate steps, where someone with who was too experienced was getting involved too early on. And so there's something there. We could talk about the information technology strategy around data collection. If you wanted to check in or just have another topic, we thought we could, if you're all going through something similar, we could talk about that, like needs assessment areas. And then maybe what are priorities for fiscal year 23-24? That was another possibility. So if you're interested, we have a little form to fill out. So I put it in here. And I'll share this with you, but let me just put this into the chat if you're interested. Oh, great. Barbara is. So here, if you don't mind filling it out. Before we pass it back to eScholar, are there any other questions for Ken on implementation? Or I don't know if Ken, you wanted to share anything?
Just to say that we're all in this in this effort together to help support and actually drive outcomes for students. And it's complicated. So I'm happy to have some partners in crime here, and really hope that we can continue some conversation.
So the link's not opening, Julianne?
Well, let's see if someone else tries it.
No, I was just going to tell you that it doesn't open for me either.
Oh wait, all of a sudden it's all right. Let me see why I'll go back in the format. Let me let eScholar present their piece, and then I will send out a new link that is working. That's
Great.
strange.
All right, well, we just have a couple of slides that we wanted to share today to basically on the kind of the not opposite, but the complementary side of the administrative side. What can we do to improve the technology aspect of data collection? And from our perspective, we're working with all of the states that are on this call. In New Mexico, we are the provider of STARS. In Texas, we're the Texas State Student Data System, ODS. In New York, we're the statewide data warehouse for STRS. So we work with all of our states with the state data collection process. So we just wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing to be able to improve performance and help end users save time in this process of data collection. So I wanted to share this case study with us here on how we've done this. The data collection system that everyone's using from New Mexico, New York, and Texas is known as the eScholar CDW, our enterprise data warehouse solution. And then in the summer, this past summer, we released version 2022, which included an upgrade to the extract, transform, and load engine, or also known as the ETL engine. This is the data loading engine that districts have to use in order to actually move data into the data warehouse. Every state has like a slightly different process, but it's essentially the process to move data into the data warehouse. So John and his team had done a ton of work to not just upgrade this really, but actually come up with an entirely new ETL engine that would be able to improve performance for all of our users who are loading data into their data warehouse. So what we did is we compared the performance of data collection from a certain state. We ran data reports to look at 4 different kinds of collections. We looked at student snapshot, student, school enrollment, and programs fact. And we were looking at this specifically for the October collection period. Every state has a different, they call their state data collection windows like different things, but essentially this was the beginning of the school year one that every single LEA in the state was participating in and essential for loading all of their future accountability and enrollment data for the entire school year. So it was a really busy time and an incredibly heavy traffic time for loading data. And we took a look at the performance data for those 2 periods, looking at it with the old ETL engine in October 2021 and the new ETL engine or data loading engine in October 2022, and compared the 2 performances and saw what was the time savings, if any. And the results were really quite striking. Looking at these 4 different load plans, looking at, again, student snapshot, student enrollment, and program fact, the old system is in this first column here, where with student snapshot, for example, it took almost 2 minutes to be able to load that data. But in the new version, with version 2022, it only took 21 seconds to be able to load that data, saving over 1.5 minutes of time with that data loading process. And each one of these saw pretty significant decreases in time, even in the ones that previously were only taking like 14 or 18 seconds because it was a smaller amount of data. It was now basically taking the amount of time that it took to just like refresh a web page to be able to load this data. And while saving maybe 9 or 12 seconds or even a minute may not sound like that much of a time savings, but these are load plans that are run by every single LEA across the state. And in this case, in October, because it's such a heavy collection period, these were run over 16,000 times, saving collectively, looking at it across the entire state, over 8 days of data loading time. Looking at this on like a higher level here, over 195 hours were saved by moving up to ETL Next, or this new ETL engine that we were able to, that John and his team built for the eScholar CDW. And we were able to see some pretty significant improvements, 82%, 61%, 64%. And these were just with these 4 different data loading plans. We anticipate seeing similar types of results for other templates or other data ETL plans as well. So our goal here was to be able to provide a faster engine and help people save time, and thus again reducing some of that burden that is put on whether it's a district data coordinator or someone at a RIC who has to load up this data for state data collection purposes. John, is there anything you want to add here?
Oh, listen, I think you covered it pretty well. I think the work that even team did and Ken did, that was amazing. We try to do our part. We always going to try to look to collectively improve our collection system. That's stuff we can do behind the scenes. And you can see it actually had an impact, which we're very happy because we know, how much of a burden it is. We go to the data conferences, we go to DayTag, we go to the STARS conference, we meet with these districts, and I know Alyssa was a teacher. My family's full of teachers. So I really have a compassion to what goes in for you all helping students, and having my own kids go through the New York State system and all the IEPs and all these other things. I see it. So happy we could do our part to help, but the stuff that Eva and team and Nona and team, all those folks, it's really cool. I'm glad you guys have a community is starting to really form. I think a lot of good things can happen.
I'm going to put a link to the improved part of the presentation. I don't know if you want to add these slides, Alyssa, into them, or you want to put a link so people can have a link to these slides as well.
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a link right now, but you know what we can do is we can send them out to folks afterwards. We can email them out.
Yeah, I just put a link in here. So if we were to have a community practice, I know we only have a few minutes left, but is there something, Amanda, I know you had talked about any like integration or consolidation. Are there certain topics that you would be interested in talking about?
Yeah, I think just approaches to that, like what are different ways to think about that? So whether looking at an individual plan or needs assessment and streamlining it, looking at the statute, ways of doing that, or looking at two different things that are similar and bringing them together. And actually our vision is to take everything and put it together kind of in a TurboTax way. So what would that look like? Yeah, and so yeah, just different approaches, ways of thinking about that. Change management towards that and experiences you've all had with that.
Awesome. And post-mortem since the summer, what's been happening in New Mexico with the implementation?
Well, that's why I'm really interested to hear about Amanda's work down in Texas, because that's exactly where we are at as well. We are also looking at other states that have consolidated their federal funding across title, across school improvement, and then consolidated their applications. as it calls for a consolidated application, but I don't know about you all in other states. Our applications are not consolidated. I mean, we really want to really start to bring things together to drive evidence-based best practice. Currently, I used to work in federal programs. It's a guessing game. We have this application out there. We tell districts how much money they have, and then they go out and they type a bunch of stuff about a bunch of stuff that they want to do. And then they send it to us and we're like, no, yeah, no, yeah. And it really doesn't help them because they're just trying to read our minds. We know what kind of change we need and what we want to see here in our state at the state level. Like, how can we actually consolidate our funds, consolidate our applications to drive those evidence-based best practices, to make it easier for districts so they're not in this guessing game of bouncing applications back and forth. And then that, another thing you talked about, the reimbursement process on the back end. Like, if we actually consolidated the applications to lead towards the best practices we want to see, there would no longer be so much of a guessing game when they're going to get reimbursed for the stuff that they spent that money on, right? Because we would already know that they're spending it on evidence-based best practices. So it sounds like Texas is ahead of the game, ahead of us on that. And that's really where we are at and where my mind is at. And I'm just glad to be in this space to learn from others.
I just wanted to add to that because New York, I actually just worked for the district, one of our large city school districts, and their consolidated app, because New York has a consolidated app, but at the same time, then there's other grant opportunities that came in through the stimulus funds. So we're talking about ARP and the ESSER2 and GEAR, and so you got 5 different other stimulus apps that districts were, depending on where they were afforded tons of money. But at the same point, the initiatives that they started to work on were done in such a way so quickly that there was not a lot of sustainability thinking. So that consolidation piece, to really think about those evidence-based practices over the long term, are they really impacting those measures that we want, and how can we sustain them?
Awesome. We're just about at time. Anyone else have any final comments? We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but this was so exciting and so fun for me to pull everyone together. I feel like I've hosted a party where everyone had like common things to talk about. wanted to share them, but I just knew that, you know, why not share across states? And it's not always easy to find ways to do this, particularly in the areas that you're looking at. So any final comments? Monette, you just jumped on again. Come to say goodbye. Okay. So Alyssa, any final thoughts, or John?
Well, I'm hoping that this year we'll have an in-person NCES Stats DC data conference, because I think it would be great to talk about some of these things with that community there, with all these different states. You know, I think this has been a great conversation, and I think the two really go hand in hand when you talk about what does this data collection mean administratively? What does this mean in terms of looking at our technology stack to make sure that this is happening as efficiently as possible? So, you know, I love the conversation that we had today, and, you know, hope that we can continue it at conferences and in community of practice. You know, we're planning on going to the summer DATAG conference. I'm sure we'll be down we were actually just down in Austin in the EdFi Summit back in November. I'm sure we'll be down in that neck of the woods again soon. You know, and we're regular participants in the STARS conference, Ken. So yeah, we look forward to being able to continue these conversations. And
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Nona.
Well, Happy New Year to everyone. It's so good to see everyone, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thanks again, Ken, for
Thank you.
sharing the great work there, and everyone else too.
Yes.